And our next presentation is going to be from Nicole Baker from Net Your Problem. Nicole is located in Seattle and is a former North Pacific groundfish fisheries observer. Net Your Problem collects fishing gear from fishermen and sends it to recyclers who turn it into the raw material needed to manufacture plastic products. They currently operate in Alaska, Maine, and California. Nicole, are you able to unmute, switch on your video if it's available, and present your screen?
I should be. Could you hear me?
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So good morning, everyone. My name's Nicole Baker. I have a fishing gear recycling business, and I'd like to thank Heather for inviting me to present to you all today. I've titled my talk Waste as a Resource, and I've got some photos here which basically shows that raw nets can get transformed into pellets, which can then get transformed into products. But before I get too far into that, I wanted to start at the beginning, which for me was working, as Andy mentioned, as a groundfish observer, which are scientists that collect data on board commercial fishing vessels. And I was in Alaska and noticed these piles of old fishing gear lying around. And so I think a lot of businesses start with people identifying problems. And for me, this was a problem, seeing all of this fishing gear lying around. So over the course of 2 years, I went from identifying this problem to implementing this solution, which was basically collecting the fishing gear, loading it up into containers, and sending it to recycling companies. What I did not do during that 2-year period was write a business plan or figure out what my total addressable market was. I was looking for a solution. And so now that we've got the business and we've got the solution, we're working every day on learning more about how to make a business case for recycling and improving waste management in coastal communities around the US. And so after that first summer collecting fishing gear, I realized that in order for our solution to be sustainable, it needed to be a business. And when I say the word sustainable, what I mean is something that's long lasting and can exist outside of external inputs. And so this is basically a description of what our business's activities are. At the top, you start with active fishing. So fishermen are using nets to catch fish. And then when the nets are done being used, and that can be for a variety of reasons, they're stretched out, or there's newer technology on the market, or it's been ripped up too many times that they don't want to fix it anymore, that net currently would go probably to storage or a landfill. Those are the most prominent methods of disposal for fishing gear at the moment. And what we do is work with those fishermen to get the nets out of storage and prepare them according to recyclers' specifications. So mainly that involves removing lines that the recyclers are not interested in. So I heard from a lady once this analogy that if you buy a bag of sugar and it comes half with sawdust, you're going to take that back because that's not what you purchased. It's the same thing for recycling. Recyclers are specialized in dealing with particular types of plastics, so we need to make sure that we're giving them what they want. And how we transport that to them is by loading it into shipping containers, and we organize all of the logistics of sending that to the recycling companies in our worldwide network. And then the recycling companies then produce the pellets or fibers that then get made into a variety of products. You see here a few examples: kayaks, bathing suits, sunglasses, or picnic tables. So this is sort of the circular process from the raw material to the processed raw material to then the final products that can be made out of that material. I get a lot of questions about how Net Your Problem sort of fits into this wider ecosystem that includes cleanup and prevention and marine debris and ghost gear. So I want to briefly mention that before I go any further. You have these 3 different Venn diagram circles that intersect to basically be what the focus of our work is. But when you talk about fishing gear, you have active fishing gear, you have end-of-life fishing gear, and then you also have ghost gear. So we're focused primarily on the end-of-life portion of that fishing gear. For marine debris, which is stuff that you would collect on the beach, a part of that is fishing gear, which in Alaska and Pacific Northwest can be actually a large percentage. And then the other diagram that we operate in is waste management. And so we think that prevention is the most effective way of making sure that stuff does not end up in the environment or in the ocean. It's actually the most cost-effective and easiest way of dealing with waste. So in that blue area in the middle, basically we focus on prevention of marine debris by collecting end-of-life fishing gear. And because this is the Zero Waste Summit, I wanted to briefly describe how I think we fit into the zero waste world and how recycling can play a huge part of that. So I know there's a lot of criticism that can sometimes be circulating about recycling. Is this just a farce by the oil companies to basically sell all their plastic products? But I personally believe that waste can be managed, and it's a really important I guess, tool in the zero waste playbook, that if we can reuse material that we've already produced, then that material is no longer a waste. You can sort of think of Net Your Problem as a real estate broker. So real estate brokers know people that are selling houses, they know people that are buying houses, and they just match those two people together. So we sort of do the same thing. We either collect material from organizations that are already doing this and help them find new markets for it, or we also have started fishing gear collection programs in some places where it didn't currently exist. Another part of our work is also to encourage demand for recycled products, especially those that are made out of fishing gear plastics like nylon, HDPE, and polypropylene. And I mentioned at the end of that circle of our work, the products that are produced, and demand for those products are actually what drives the collection and processing parts of the circle. If nobody is interested in buying that recycled plastic once it gets produced, that means that the processing of that material and the collection, which is what we do, those parts become irrelevant. So we also do work on encouraging demand for the products, because that drives demand for our services. And then because this is an innovation summit, I also wanted to highlight how we think that our work is innovative. The first is that Net Your Problem is set up as a for-profit business. And I think this is very innovative, because a lot of the organizations that are doing stuff around, beach cleanups, they rely a lot on volunteers, unpaid labor, grants, and they have a nonprofit structure. So for us, I think this is something that's very different, but is also very important to us. I mentioned that I want things to be sustainable and long lasting. And I really think that a for-profit business is the way that we believe that this is going to be possible. We also use the waste management hierarchy to guide our actions for disposal. So when you're talking about generating waste and how to dispose of it, at the bottom of the pyramid, the best strategy is always to reduce waste so that you don't have to manage it. But if you do have to generate waste, then the best way of disposing of that is to reuse it. And this is a really big part of what we're doing currently in Maine with our rope depot. So we have this facility where fishermen drop off line, and then we resell it either to artists that are making mats or other items out of that, or young fishermen that are just getting started. They can purchase that you can't reuse it, then the mechanically recycle it for any kind of, because of contamination or degradation issues, then we will use waste to energy or waste to fuel as a way of disposing of that. We also just really think differently about fishing nets and their plastic as a resource. So fishermen will think of this as a headache and something that has no value. But if we just reframe our thinking from waste as a waste to waste as a resource, then that opens up a lot of opportunities for how we can dispose of this material. We're also utilizing a lot of new recycling facilities. So 2 of the main recyclers that exist for fishing gear right now are Plastics, which is based in Denmark, and Aquafil, which is based in Slovenia and Italy. They produce this EcoNile fiber. And so these facilities are less than 10 years old. A lot of the processing capacity that is existing for recycling in general is very new and innovative and has come out in the last 10 years. So these kind of options for recycling fishing gear would not have been able to be done before these processing facilities came about. Also, because this is the Pacific Northwest Innovation Summit, I wanted to talk about how we are specifically making an impact in the Pacific Northwest. The idea was certainly born here. I'm living in Seattle right now, but also we're doing a lot of collecting of material from Alaska, which I think I would consider part of the Pacific Northwest. So we travel to these communities, meet with the fishermen, and then collect the gear there. Since 2017, we've been able to collect 880,000 pounds of fishing gear. And then we're also working in Washington in the Port of Seattle at the Fishermen's Terminal facility to revise the disposal options for fishermen that have their boats docked there. And then we're also doing something very similar at the International Terminal at the Port of Newport in Oregon. And then also the processing facilities that we use. We're currently using recyclers that are based in Canada and in Europe, but I think in the coming years, there's going to be a lot of processing facilities that are that we can use in British Columbia. So there's 2 that I know of right now that are basically getting their processes up and running. And so hopefully they'll be able to accept material from us in the next couple of years. I wanted to mention our partners that we're working with, because without them, we would not be able to have the impact that we have. And we call a lot of these the likely partners. So it's the one that you would think of would be associated with any kind of disposal in the fishing industry. And so the primary partner for us and one of our main customers is the fishing industry itself. So those are fishing vessels or boat owners or captains that identify the gear that they have to get rid of and then choose us to dispose of that for them. We also have harbors and ports. Like I mentioned, we're working with some in Washington and Oregon to basically offer this disposal service to the vessels that dock at their marinas. We're also working with local or state governments, primarily the waste management divisions, public works department, or the landfills, to divert material from their landfill. Some landfills are able to say, you know, every year that we extend the life of our landfill is worth X amount of money to us. So they are financially interested in diverting material from their landfills. We're also working with net manufacturers, which are the companies that are basically building the nets for the fishermen to recycle sort of any kind of scraps from their manufacturing process, and also to get them involved in the take back of nets or the implementation of fees on the sale of new nets. Our end users are, like I mentioned, the recycling companies or the artists that we can resell these materials to. I mentioned before about the manufacturers that are using recycled fishing gear plastic in their supply chain. So we're working with them on donating a percentage of their proceeds to the collection efforts, and also developing branded products to sell because the products are more where the profit margin is and they're attention grabbers and can get people on board with our mission. We've also worked with 3 different tribes, 2 in Alaska and 1 in Washington, that have money either through the EPA's IGAP program or the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to dispose of fishing gear from tribal fisheries. And then we're also working with community groups. So I mentioned that we start collection programs in different locations, but we also help people that have already been collecting gear find new markets. And so that's a couple community groups in Alaska so far. A couple of things that are working in our favor or enabling factors that allow us to have the impact that we've had so far are that there is a large pool of stakeholders to build coalitions from. So we do not believe that the financial burden of paying for the costs associated with recycling should be all on the hands of the fishermen. Like I mentioned, the landfill owners have a financial interest in diverting material. Seafood processing companies do. They can tell a great story about their boats. So there really is a large pool of people that we can build a coalition from to distribute those financial costs associated with recycling. There's also a lot of public attention right now on ocean plastics and beach cleanups on the North Pacific Gyre, and fishing gear is a big part of that. So we're hoping that all of this attention will encourage manufacturers to think about what kind of plastic are they using in their manufacturing process, and hopefully switching to use recycled plastic, and more specifically fishing gear plastic for us. I mentioned too that in British Columbia, there's going to be this increase in processing capacity. So I think as more and more recyclers come online and people make investment in the processing capabilities, we won't have to send fishing gear so far away to have it turned into the pellets. I also think that plastic can be recycled indefinitely if it's done properly. So by done properly, I mean sorted well, make sure that it's clean, that it's all one type of plastic, and you can add additives to it to sort of get it up to near virgin quality. So I think you can sort of think about plastic as a kind of renewable resource, which means that we really shouldn't be extracting any more fossil fuels and making any more virgin plastic, because we have all this plastic that we can recycle already. And for us, there's not really a lot of competition in the Pacific Northwest or North America in general. There are a lot of countries in the world that are fishing countries, and there's a lot of global potential. Right now, we're focused primarily on the US, on the East and West coasts, and then trying to figure out what is the right fit for us to expand internationally. And then also I mentioned too, these partnerships around products to support collection. So the products like the phone case you saw on the first slide are what grab a lot of attention and allow people to generate a high profit margin. So we're trying to build partnerships around those products to support our collection efforts. We really believe that our expertise is interfacing with the fishing community and the recyclers, but we do realize that the products are what can enable a lot of the finances around this. And then obstacles yet to overcome, or I guess where there is opportunities for us to do better. I think there are a lot of incentives in the wrong place, which make it hard to do recycling. So when you have indefinite storage and landfill as free disposal options, makes it very, very difficult for us to communicate to fishermen why they should recycle. And in fact, today we just launched a video on our YouTube channel, which is basically how to convince fishermen that, that they should be recycling their end-of-life gear. But things like opportunity cost of the land that you're going to free up, it's not really that alluring of an argument to make. So I think we really need these incentives to exist, which make it that recycling is not that difficult of a decision for people to make.
Hi, Nicole. It's Andy. This is your 2-minute warning.
Okay, I'm almost done. Thanks. We've also got this mentality where people should get paid for nets or free disposal, which I think is kind of strange because I pay for garbage to be collected at the end of my driveway. So we need to have innovative ideas like paying for recycling when nets are purchased, so we don't have this barrier when the disposal needs to happen. I mentioned before too about grants, nonprofits, and unpaid labor. I really think we need to move from the fact that only these types of instruments are available for organizations to have impact. Businesses also can definitely have a lot of impact. And in terms of the finances, It's hard for us as a for-profit business to get investors because we're not able to show 10 or 20% return on investment that they're looking for, even though we are able to have a really large impact. And some of these grants that are available are only available for nonprofits, even though we could really use that as sort of a seed or initial investment. And so with that, I'll thank everybody for their time and encourage you to connect with us in all these ways. And I'd be happy to take any questions if there's still time.
Thanks, Nicole. Super interesting presentation. We've only got around 40 seconds left. So I'm going to ask one of the questions that's come in. Thinking about potential partnerships, would you partner with a municipal recycling program that wanted to start collecting nets?
Absolutely, yeah. We're looking for recycling capabilities or anybody else that would be interested in trialing processing this material if they're not already.